This news just in, Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni set to return as the Eagles head coach in 2024. We're talking about that on today's Philadelphia Eagles Now. Also, Sean Desai got fired. Is Brian Johnson next? And a whole list of coordinator replacements that we have to go through on today's show as well. First, Eagles Now is presented by Rhone. I'm wearing their commuter shirt right now, and you can get 20% off when you use the code CHATSPORTS at rhone.com/chatsports. We'll have that link down below in the comment section as well as in the show notes of today's video. It's 2024. You got to start off the new year looking good, feeling good, and you can do that with the Rhone Commuter Collection. Why I love their products: high-quality men's clothing, breathable and stretchable fabric. No need to go to the dry cleaner because the more that you wear these shirts, wrinkles disappear. Anti-odor technology, so you're not going to be stinky around the workplace or going out with the homies or on a date. And they have everything that you need for your wardrobe: dress shirts, polos, pants, shorts, and much more. Rhone.com/chatsports. Promo code chatsports for 20% off. Limited time offer, so take advantage of it right now. So Nick Sirianni coming back to the Birds. Had an indication over the last couple of days this was going to be the case, and it looks as though that's pretty much official. Why is that, Chase? Well, Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman are going to hold an end-of-the-season press conference on Wednesday. It's just going to be those two. Owner Jeffrey Lurie, who's making this decision to bring Nick Sirianni back, is not going to be on hand. So there's a possibility here we're not going to hear from Lurie for a long time as to why he's bringing back Sirianni. And what's of note here is that Nick is going into year 4 of his 5-year contract. So there's not really a huge announcement for the Eagles that, yes, we're bringing Sirianni back. That would be kind of weird. But when you have an end-of-the-season press conference with the head coach and the general manager, that's the tandem that's going to be leading this offseason with football operations. While Sirianni is coming back, it's not going to be a change at head coach. There are going to be major changes to this coaching staff. Stay tuned to find out how. I think this is the right move. Sirianni is 34-17 in 3 years. He's won a lot of ball games for this team. He's implemented a really good culture. The players really respect him. And I don't think that a stretch where you lose 7 of 8 games to end the year, albeit with an awful, atrocious, ugly loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is enough to move on from a head coach who's young, who's shown that he wins a lot, who has these plus qualities as a head coach in this league. And yes, it was not good how the Eagles ended the year, but it would be a little bit of a reactionary move. And I do think that with coaching staff changes, the Eagles can be elite once again in 2024. You look no further than the resume. Year 1 of a rebuild, the Eagles overcome a slow start in which they started the year 2-5, and then they ended at 9-8. They made it to the wild card round of the playoffs, and that was a pretty good first year for Sirianni. And then last year, number 1 seed in the NFC, won the NFC Championship game over a very good Niners team. Philadelphia went 14-3, made it to the Super Bowl, should have won that game. And if the Eagles started off this season slow, and let's say they went 5-12, we just would have chalked it up as a Super Bowl hangover, and there's no doubt that Sirianni would have been back and his job wouldn't have come into question. But because the Eagles started 10-1 with Super Bowl expectations coming off that Super Bowl defeat, and then they lost 7 of their last 8 games, including that wild card game against Tampa Bay, and the Eagles failed to make adjustments offensively. The defense is one of the worst that my eyes have ever seen in the history of the NFL. And with how Sirianni kind of carried himself a little bit and the disconnect in the locker room, how players didn't look as though they were putting forward a lot of effort, that's why people were calling for his head. Now, there's good with Sirianni, there's bad with Sirianni. Let's start with some of the good here, and this is important because he's coming back, and it's time for these players to get over and flush what happened the last month and a half of the season. He's 34-17 as the Eagles head coach. No Eagles coach has ever had a better record, I believe, in the first 3 years of leading this franchise. Eagles made it to the Super Bowl less than a calendar year ago. He's built a good culture, respected by players. That's why Jason Kelce, Fletcher Cox, and other veterans going to bat for him after the year. Hassan Reddick included in that as well. When Sirianni and Reddick, during that Giants game on Christmas, they got into a little bit of a beef. And he's made a couple of good hires at OC and DC. Shane Steichen, maximize that Colts roster, bottom 5 team in the NFL. They nearly made it to the playoffs, though. And then Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator, did a really good job with the Arizona Cardinals this year. So with Sirianni now having a full off season to interview just a wide array of candidates, I do believe that he can get a quality OC in here and a quality DC in here to get this team back on track to be better coached, because this team was disengaged and sloppy really from training camp all the way through the season. That was a constant pattern. The bad was Sirianni. Eagles no doubt collapsed, and Philadelphia's going to have to overcome the mental ramifications of that. And when you lose that many games to end the year, when you start 10-1 and then you don't even win a playoff game, it's certainly not a good look. The other negative with Sirianni is that he doesn't call plays. So let's say he brings in a quality offensive coordinator like he did with Steichen. The clock is already running as soon as that person gets hired, if they're good, because they're going to be gone in 1 to 3 years because other teams are going to want to poach that person to be their head coach. Offense, defense, a mess the last month and a half. And yes, he can get overly emotional, too into the game. But I think that's partially good, partially bad. I mean, it was what? 60 plus days ago in which people were saying, Sirianni, perfect for Philadelphia. This is awesome. How quickly things can change in the National Football League. That's why this league stands for not for long. With Sirianni coming back, and we'll get to the report that Brian Johnson is not expected to come back as the OC. With Sirianni and this being his offense, he needs to make an overhaul, this offensive unit. Make changes, I should say. And here's how you can do that in my estimation. The Eagles are 32nd in pre-snap motion this year. There's no excuse for that because in the modern day age of football, pre-snap motion only helps your quarterback out. It helps your offense out. It helps put your offensive weapons in a position to succeed. And this Eagles offense is still really good. We'll see what they do at running back. I wouldn't mind seeing DeAndre Swift come back and the Eagles draft a rookie. We talked about that in our perfect offseason plan, but you still have A.J. Brown. You still have Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. Just do a better job of making their lives easier, as well as Jalen Hurts. But also, with some of that pre-snap motion, you're able to identify if the defense is playing man or zone. And that pre-snap motion just puts a player to a position of the field where they can make some plays. So, got to see more of that. I want to see the Eagles get back to playing bully ball, which they did in the 2022 season, which set up the pass. This year, they didn't stick with the running game enough. For DeAndre Swift all year, to have 20 or more carries twice, it's inexcusable. Eagles also have to be less reliant on the deep ball. Their inability to target the middle area of the field doesn't make any sense. So that, paired with no pre-snap motion, it just doesn't go in line with some of the great offensive play callers in today's NFL. And then have an effing answer for the blitz, please. Now, this is partially on Jalen Hurts. He probably didn't have a lot of confidence in some of the play calls, and he has to identify if blitzers are coming. But when we've been talking about the blitz for so long, multiple weeks, several weeks, and then against Tampa Bay, when they're third in blitz rate, you know that the blitz is coming, and the Eagles to still not have a hot, to still not have a safety valve, for Jalen Hurts and this Eagles offense to have no answers at all, that right there is coaching malpractice, game planning malpractice, and it's absolutely inexcusable. So with that, I ask you this. This is today's poll question. Do you agree with the decision to bring Nick Sirianni back? Type A for agree, D for disagree. Let me know in the comment section. Now, I mentioned this a little bit briefly earlier on, but we're most likely not going to hear from Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie until the owners' meeting in March. It's a long time to try to figure out why he's deciding to bring Sirianni back, and if he should be answering questions about this matter, which is a huge offseason storyline for Philadelphia. He's not as visible as a Jerry Jones, which I kind of like, and I think that that can be a good thing. But the fact that we're not going to hear from Lurie until March is just going to milk this whole process out. And I'm fascinated to see how he came to this decision after a couple of meetings throughout this weekend. Look, this is why you subscribe to the channel. When breaking Eagles news happens, we have you covered right here on the show, and that's a big reason why we've been able to grow the Eagles Now empire to nearly 72,000 subscribers. So make sure you hit that sub button because we have you covered every step of the way during this pivotal, very important Eagles offseason. Now let's go to this report from Derek Gunn, friend of the show. Had him on my podcast a couple of times way back in the day. Used to work for NBC Sports Philadelphia, and he's reporting this, that all indications are that offensive coordinator Brian Johnson will not be returning as the Eagles offensive coordinator. He will land elsewhere in some offensive capacity. Of note here as well, he is no longer going to interview with the Carolina Panthers for their head coaching vacancy. The Panthers have already moved on to the second stage of interviews, and that does not include the Eagles play caller here in 2023. And according to reports, Jalen Hurts, who's known Brian Johnson since he was 4 years old, because Johnson played under Hurts' dad, Averion, way back in the day in high school, were not often on the same page. And Hurts would get the play call from Brian Johnson. He would switch things often. He would audible often because he did not have trust in the coaching staff or the play calls that came in. And I know that we looked at the raw numbers for the Eagles offense plenty of times this year, and they finished top 5, top 10 in a lot of major statistical categories, but something was just so empty with Brian Johnson. Didn't go to the run consistently enough. Consistent shots to the outside on some of those long balls, not targeting the middle area of the field, not relying on the Eagles' strengths. And I understand this is Nick Sirianni's offense, right? But the play calling from Brian Johnson was clunky. It didn't make sense. It was inconsistent. In the red zone, they had struggles, and against really good defenses, especially toward the end of the year, they literally could not score touchdowns or move the ball. Other Eagles coaching changes. Defensive coordinator Sean Desai, this pretty expected, has been fired by Nick Sirianni. Also, Matt Patricia, who did not have a contract beyond this year, will not return to Philadelphia in 2024. He's going to seek opportunities elsewhere. So the Eagles are going to have a new look and a new coordinator on the defensive side of the ball. Desai was okay, not great. Matt Patricia even worse. And again, it's one of the worst Eagles defensive teams that I can remember in my lifetime, and I've watched pretty much every snap of this football team since I've been about 4 years old, from 1996 on. It was that bad. Bad tackling, can't get after the quarterback, secondary breakdowns, bad linebacker play, awful safety play. It was just so brutal to watch. And I'm hoping that the Eagles could bring in a defensive coordinator who's basically going to be able to be the head coach of the defense. And that's why I'm not surprised to see some of these names being linked to Philadelphia right now. Wink Martindale, longtime defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. He was the defensive coordinator the last 2 years with the New York Giants. He did not get along well with Brian Dable. That defense was pretty good, pretty creative. They would get very aggressive in blitzing the quarterback a lot. And with Baltimore for so long, what do you think about when you think about the Baltimore Ravens defensively? Brute, physicality, force, flying around, making plays. Opposing offenses feared those Ravens defenses. Now, of course, there's a reason why John Harbaugh moved on, as well as Brian Dable and him kind of clashed. He's an interesting personality for sure. But if he can come in here and be the head coach of this defense, that's not a defensive coordinator that I would hate the Eagles bringing in, and you wouldn't really have to worry about him getting a head coaching job elsewhere. This one's a little bit of a head-scratcher in Ron Rivera, former Washington Commanders head coach, who's interviewing with the Eagles today. According to reports, those Commanders' defenses were not good. And he's been a head coach for a long time. Carolina Panthers, they had some success there, made it to the Super Bowl when Cam Newton had that MVP campaign back in, 2015? And then he was let go by Carolina. He goes to Washington. They didn't have any sustained success, and the defensive side of the football, especially this year, was a nightmare. They had to fire defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio. Then Ron Rivera was calling the plays, and they weren't good after that. So what tells me that an old school mind is going to be able to have success when his unit of specialty has not had success in recent time. And then you have Mike Caldwell, who was fired by Doug Peterson after spending the last 2 years as the Jaguars' defensive coordinator. He actually played for the Eagles in the late 90s, early 2000s, and obviously came up under that Jim Johnson scheme. So that's another name to keep an eye out for. What's the pattern here from Nick Sirianni so far? With Wink Martindale, Ron Rivera, Mike Caldwell. Veteran coaches. He's pivoting off of what he just did, bringing in young coordinators like a Sean Desai and a Brian Johnson, who are very inexperienced for a Super Bowl-ready roster, and that inexperience did cost Philadelphia quite a bit here this year. And then to the offensive side of the ball, Mike Garafolo with this report over the weekend that the Eagles could be interested in Jim Bob Cooter for offensive coordinator. Philadelphians are going to have a blast with that name if he does get hired. on 94 WIP, 97.5 The Fanatic. He was actually a consultant with Philadelphia back in 2021. Right now, he is currently the offensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. Shane Steichen ties, with Steichen obviously calling the plays. Jim Bob Cooter does have experience as an OC in this league with the Detroit Lions. So he has vast experience and familiarity with this coaching staff and Sirianni, as well as this organization, and that play calling experience important to hone in on here. So who do you want as the Eagles offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator? Drop some names down below in the comments section. Last week we talked about my candidates, and I think it's better than what the Eagles are looking at least in the early process here. Now, there's been some changes on this list because Shane Waldron was just hired this morning on Monday as the Bears offensive coordinator. G.J. Kinney, Texas State head coach, he's out there. We've looked at his numbers plenty at Incarnate Word, as well as Texas State Clint Kubiak, the Niners pass game coordinator. He interviewed for the Bears OC job, didn't get it. Zach Robinson is the Rams passing game coordinator, but he's going to the Jacksonville Jaguars, I believe. Eric Bieniemy, Commanders OC. He's out there. I thought he did a pretty solid job this year and obviously has that background with Patrick Mahomes. Cliff Kingsbury, USC quarterbacks coach. He met with the Chicago Bears. Frank Smith is the Dolphins offensive coordinator. Byron Leftwich, former Bucs offensive coordinator. And then Darrell Bevel, the Dolphins quarterbacks coach. I do want to check on Zach Robinson to see if he has been hired anywhere. Patriots are set to interview Zach Robinson for their OC job. He did not go to the Jacksonville Jaguars, but the Jags did hire the former Falcons defensive coordinator, who the Eagles were said to be interested in. And then you go to my defensive coordinator candidates here. Jesse Minter, my number one choice, Michigan defensive coordinator. Mike Vrabel, if he doesn't get a head coaching job, and right now, some of the jobs are being filled. Denard Wilson, he was with this organization last year. Some in the Eagles organization believe that Sirianni made a mistake in letting him go, not hiring him as DC. That was the guy that the players had advocated for, and Darius Slay told the Philadelphia Inquirer, if we had Denard Wilson this year, we'd be better. Leslie Frazier, former Bills defensive coordinator, that's another one of those veteran names. And then Glenn Schumann, young up-and-comer like Jesse Minter, the Georgia co-defensive coordinator, who maybe he'd be able to maximize some of the Georgia Bulldogs on this roster. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be live on Wednesday on Eagles Now, barring any more breaking news. And we'll catch you then and catch you every day because that's what we do with the best Eagles coverage coming your way on the channel.